Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is well today. And there we go. I hope everyone is well today and have been doing well. So welcome to today's discussion forum as part of our collections management course. And today we'll be talking about the caring of dry collections. As you know, this is following the webinar that was done last week on dry collections, and we hope you have your questions ready and your inputs and everything to discuss, or we wouldn't want you to be left unsure about something. So this is why we have these discussion forums. Today we will have a list of panelists, which I'm going to just mention, and then as they speak, they will give you an introduction of who they are. But firstly, we will have Michelle to open up, and then followed by Swiso Mngati. He's from Buse Herbarium, though he is part of the NSCF hub team, but he's based at Buse Herbarium. And then we also have Joffred Opperman and Gabriel Lukoji from Iziko Museums of South Africa. And we also have Sibusisiwe Ngolana from Bay World, and Mandi Sandlovu from KZN Museum. And then to end off, we'll have Nikisha Singh from Sen Parks. So welcome everyone, welcome our panelists, and I hope you're ready to share what you have today. Let's move to the next slide. I'm just gonna go through the guidelines for this discussion forum just so that we know what is expected of each of us. So firstly, we ask you that, as always, you keep your contributions helpful and considerate of the host as well as other participants. So whoever is in this room, let us respect each other and be kind and nice to each other. And then you can use the chat box to immediately you can do this. I see people have gotten us started because this is our tradition. So say hello and let us know which institution you're joining us from. And yeah, that's just a greeting. Let's greet each other. And those who have already done so, thank you so much. I see there's a lot of you who have done this. So thanks for doing that. And you can also use the chat box to say hello, to add your questions. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box just to make sure that we have all the questions that you put there, we have them answered and addressed. And the panelists will also be answering your questions at the end of all the presentations. And then as we go into the discussions. We will have about an hour dedicated to discussions. So we ask that you please feel free to either it's asking questions or commenting or bringing in something that has not been covered by the presentations that is related to dry collection. So your concerns, whatever it is, please feel free to share that. This is the platform for that. And then I think that's it from me. We can now move on to Michelle to let us know what to expect.
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the discussion forum today. We're going to be talking more about dry collections and managing dry collections and addressing the risks to them. And just a reminder from the webinar last week where we went into quite a lot of detail about the standards and the risks. The main risks to these collections is physical damage. So many of them are very fragile and very brittle, and they can break very easily if they're incorrectly stored or through handling of them. There are also chemical changes that can happen, and that can be because of pollutants, and those pollutants are often from the storage material. So wood or plastics or other materials that usually when they're not at the correct temperature or humidity, they start to release gases or other chemicals that cause changes in the structure of these specimens. So that's often very subtle, you don't see it, and it builds up over time. And then also just physical damage caused by incorrect or fluctuations in temperature or humidity. So what we said was that if you don't control your temperature and humidity, there's contraction and expansion repeated of the specimens. And again, it's often things you can't see, you don't see it, but then eventually you get cracking or fracturing of these specimens because they've expanded and contracted repeatedly over time. And then loss of color. So color is often an important character for doing taxonomic studies on the material. And that color can be lost because of light exposure. Water damage is obviously very serious. So through flooding or leaking roofs or any other type of water damage is very serious for many of these specimens. And then mold caused by damp. So mold can grow over specimens, release enzymes that break down the specimens. And then our big issue that we're going to be hearing a lot about this morning is pests, the risk of pests, because these are very common and they cause extensive damage to individual specimens, but they can also spread through a collection very quickly, and a large proportion of that collection can be lost. And then loss of labels or loss of the information associated with a specimen. So if you have no good way of connecting a specimen to the information about it, then it becomes of no use for research purposes. So those are all the big risks, and we talked about those, and we're really going to hear mostly about pests, but some other challenges as well this morning. Next slide. So today we're very lucky to have contributions from several different people who actually work with different kinds of dry collections. So we're going to be hearing about something about herbarium specimens, something about terrestrial vertebrates, marine mammal skeletal collection, pinned insects, and then a mixture of all of those in the Sandparks reference collection. So we'll be having input, we'll have a presentation from each of these people, and you'll be able to see the variation in approaches and challenges for caring for these collections. And yeah, keep a record of all your questions or anything that jumps out for you. And then at the end, we'll take all the questions and we'll open up the discussion as well. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Sifiso to talk about the work that they do at the Buse Herbarium at UKZN. So over to you, Sifiso.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. Well, basically, as Michelle said, my name is Sifiso Mngadi. I'm the scientific curation specialist based at Buse Herbarium, and I'm working on a project of integrating orphan collection from various herbarium in KZN to Buse Herbarium collection. Next slide, please. So, just a brief background. Buse Herbarium, before the integration of the orphan collection, it was estimated to have about 150,000 specimens, sorry. And currently we have integrated about 4 herbaria, which is one of the herbaria which had more specimen to integrate was Kilik herbarium specimen from Ezemvelo, which had about 33,000 specimen, and 15,000 specimen from Ward Herbarium in Westville campus, as well as about 7,000 specimen that was from former University of Natal in Howard College. And then we also have about 15,000 specimens from Pondoland herbarium, also from KZN Ezemvelo. And together, this makes an estimation of about 220,000 specimens that, when all this is complete, will be housed at Bios herbarium. And we also need to stress out that Pondoland collection include most of species that are endemic in the Pondoland Center of Endemism, which seems to be a bonus to researchers who shows more interest into that center of endemism. And one of the reasons, and this is one of the reasons why there was a need to integrate this collection for researchers to have easy access, and for all those species that are endemic in that area to be housed in a well-managed institute. Next slide, please. So, protecting plant specimen from decomposing. The conservation and restoration of herbaria includes the preventive care, repair, and restoration of herbarium specimen. And some specimens may be susceptible or sensitive to mold, pest, and damage from improper storage conditions. We should also know that it takes a lot of time and care to keep our collection and specimen in good condition. So there is a need for us to make sure that all the incoming specimens that we have are free from infestation. And we also need to take into consideration that before any dried material enters the herbarium building, it must be subjected to decontamination by deep freezing the material at approximately minus 30 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 72 hours to avoid any pest from entering or any potential introduction of destructive insects. Next slide, please. Okay. So the specimens are subjected to a process of natural decontamination to kill any destructive insect or insect eggs. So natural decontamination can be of freezing or insecticide chemicals. So some herbaria use chemicals to decontaminate their collection, but at Bios, we have chosen the deep freezing as our primary method of decontamination for the incoming dry specimen. This is done to prevent pests from entering the herbarium, and we also condone the use of poisons due to human health concern. In the past, a bundle of a specimen was frozen once for at least 3 days, which is 72 hours, but usually for a week at a temperature of less than minus 20 degrees Celsius. And we also followed up with the checks when we used the collection, and we normally did fumigation twice a year. That was previously. Next slide, please. So what is done currently to make sure that there are no pests, or to prevent pests from entering the herbarium through dried specimen, especially the specimen that we are integrating? So currently we freeze an incoming bundle, especially new accession specimen, twice for at least 3 days, which is often 72 hours. And we normally freeze them longer because we need to work on those specimens as they come before we freeze the next batch of specimen. And we do that at a temperature closer to minus 30 degrees Celsius, if possible. We take the bundle out after the first freeze and then leave it at room temperature for a week. Why? The idea is that any developing insect, larvae or eggs that may hatch during this time will be killed when we do the second freeze. So after this one period of time out of a first freezing phase, We should stress that we used to believe that 2 weeks was a good time period, but some entomologists that advised our team during the collection management and conservation working group suggested that 2 weeks are enough for some insects to complete a life cycle and go into resting phase again. So what we try now is that we try 1 week in between freezing of a new accession. So we freeze the bundle, and then after a week, then we refreeze it again to kill any insect that develop after the eggs have hatched. We also keep a temperature, it's 19 degrees Celsius. So our temperature at the herbarium from acorns should be at not more than 19 degrees. So we try to make sure that they are 19. At least they may be under between 15 and 19, but because we are actually physically based at the herbarium, we try to at least keep it at 19 degrees Celsius. And then we also monitor and report any change in temperature, especially if it goes above 19 degrees. Next slide, please. So as our new integrated pest management at Abuse Herbarium, we do not fumigate twice a year anymore unless we have picked up from monitoring our collection that there is any insect outbreak. Then there is a need to fumigate. The insect damage in bundles of specimen that may be found during monitoring is dealt with at a level of that bundle. For instance, when we open a cabinet and we find out that a certain part of the collection has pest or insect, we take out that part of the collection, we wrap it in plastic bags, we seal it, and then we put it in the freezer as it is shown on our pictures there, and then we freeze them as they are. So we follow the procedure of freezing it once for 72 hours, take them out for a week, and then refreeze them again before we file them back to the collection. Next slide, please. So with often collection at Abuse Herbarium, what we actually do is we first look at how badly the collection is affected. So for each of these 4 herbaria, we check if the herbarium was badly affected before integration, or the collection was badly affected before integration, so that we see which step to follow in terms of making sure that there are no insects from those specimen to enter the collection. So we freeze our specimen for 72 hours, and then we take them out from the freezer after 72 hours. We leave them at room temperature for a few hours before we process them. After doing all those steps of rechecking the specimen, checking the identification, checking whether the specimen is good enough to be integrated, checking whether the specimen is not completely eaten if there were any insect, and then we separate them again into batches, and then we refreeze them for the second time. Next slide, please. So once the specimen have been refused from the second time, then after 72 hours, we take those specimens back into the collection. But if ever there is any specimen that are damaged, we firstly clean those specimens, making sure that the dusty powder that comes from the damaged specimen are not being refiled back, to make sure that there are no residues of possible eggs that might hatch in the future. So in conclusion of all this, we should take note that the coastal herbaria seems to battle with cigarette beetles or book lice that attack more collection in comparison to the inland collections. And this area really needs more attention in future in terms of how to go about and making sure that we prevent a huge infestation of pests in the coastal herbaria. And also we should take note that maintaining and protecting the collections that we house is a full-time labor of love. So maybe another answer to the question of how do you protect specimens from decomposing is you just have to love your collection a little extra. Monitor your collection, temperature, and start a process of decontamination immediately when there are any signs of pest control. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sifiso. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next presenter now. So I'll hand over to Joffred. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joffred Opperman. I'm the collections manager for the terrestrial vertebrate collections here at the Zico South African Museum. This collection started in the mid-1800s and consists of three sub-collections, namely the mammalogy collection, ornithology collection, and herpetology collection. Next slide, please. The mammal collection consists mostly of dry specimens like mammal mounts, study skins, skeletons. Although we do have a small amount of wet specimens as well. We have close to 13,000 specimens in our collection for the mammals. Next slide, please. Next slide. That's just part of our osteology collection. It's also part of our mammal collection in our basement store. We also have an ornithology collection, as mentioned. We have over 18,000 specimens, mostly study skins, eggs, and skeletons, with a small number of wet specimens as well. Next slide, please. And we also have a herpetology collection, which mostly consists of wet specimens, although we have some dry specimens like tortoise shells and other reptile skeletons used for comparative studies. Next slide, please. So the terrestrial vertebrate collections consist of 3 permanent stores and 2 temporary stores that we have to routinely fumigate. Fumigants used include perodichlorobenzene, PDB, pyrethrin, and cypermethrin. The specimens on display, usually they fumigated every 6 months, and these are taxidermy mounts. And these are usually in display cases, which are properly sealed, and the PDB gets replenished every 6 months, as I mentioned. But we also have taxidermy mounts that's in open displays. So these are exposed to pests and to dust. So these we dust regularly, inspect, and also treat them with insecticide as a preventative measure. We also have specimens in cupboards in our dry stores, skins. These we also replenish every 3 months. These are with PDB. The PDB we also use for the specimens that we have, the dry specimens that we have on display. Our storerooms, our dry collection storerooms, we fumigate with doom foggers, and this we do every three months. Skins, hides, bones, horns, and feathers are mainly damaged by fish moths and hook lice that would eat the labels. Beetles are one of our main pests that's a risk to our specimens in the collection. Cockroaches, clothes moths are also pests that we encounter in the collections. So any incoming specimen materials are quarantined in freezers, or we isolate them and put them in fumigation cupboards, PDB fumigation cupboards. We never bring skeletons into our dry skin stores, our study skin stores, to avoid potentially bringing in pests into the collections. And what we also do as a preventative measure, we treat specimens with formalin or Ulan, but we usually use Ulan because Ulan is more long-lasting. So that is a preventative measure of to repel pests from eating the specimens. And where possible, we would treat the shells or hoofs in particular, I mean, as part of the skeletal material in the collection. Next slide, please. Over to Gabriel.
Good morning, all. My name is Gabriel Bukasalukoji. I am an assistant collection manager in the terrestrial vertebrate. I'm also from Iziko Museum. I'll be briefing or talking on the procedure for PDP fumigation of mammal and bird mound exhibition. So we do fumigation after hours for the safety of the public and the staff as well. Some of the display cases need to be opened by removing glass and suckers with suckers and cordless power draw. And some of the display cases need to be opened by key to get access to it. So once we open those display cases, we leave the display cases to air a bit before we start the replenishing of PDP in the cup. At that time, the air conditioning should remain running in order to ensure that the area is well ventilated and hazardous fumes are extracted. Replenishing of PDP in the cup also takes place when we open the cases. That is in the exhibition area inside the museum. So we do also fumigation in the storeroom. So we do prepare before we do the fumigation. So the procedure, if we can go to the next slide, the preparation procedure for fumigation of dry collection and storeroom. Next slide, please. So staff that are in an immediate area must be instructed to leave the area and must observe the instruction. This is not optional for reason of health and safety. Fumigation is usually done overnight. The air conditioning system should be turned off for the duration of the fumigation. And while we're doing that fumigation, it is compulsory that we wear PPE because of residual fumigant that can be inhaled. So we put fumigation notification outside the door for its duration, and we put caps to cover the fire smoke detectors to avoid any fumigant particles from triggering the fire alarm. So we also switch the fire suppression system panel from automatic to manual. And then we open all the drawers and compact this so that the fumigation part of it penetrates properly. Then we set we set off the doom foggers when the room is fully prepared. And aftermath procedure for fumigation of dry collection storeroom. So the next morning when we come, the first thing that we do, we switch the air conditioning back on so that it extracts any fumes that can still be in the room. And after that, we check and inspect specimen in the drawers for insects or frost. And if by any chance that we see that there was activities of insect around, so we take those drawers or those cabinets away and we put the PDB in, and we begin to monitor this the drawers until we are sure that everything is being well maintained. So if we need any further assistance, we normally require from the entomology department for them to identify which type of insect is it. And after that, we switch the fire suppression system panel back again to automatic. And then we take the caps from these fire smoke detectors And we always do this fumigation between Monday and Thursday. So basically, we don't want to do it on Friday because on weekend we don't work. So it's preferable to do it between Monday and Thursday. And after that, we're gonna remove the notification that we put outside the door. And sticky traps are placed in a storeroom, monitored on an ongoing basis. Basically, it's just we put those stick traps, so if there's any activity in the room, we'll be able to detect and attend to it. And the last part, we sign off the record documentation of maintenance schedule. Thank you very much. Back to Geoffrey.
Thank you, Gabriel. Just to mention, we had one instance, or to just name an instance where we suspected pest activity was with a bovid skull, the antelope skull. So we found fresh near the horns, and so we had to isolate the specimen from the rest of the collection. We cleaned it, we treated it with cypermethrin. It's known as Cypermex, is the product they use at the London Museum. So we used Cypermex to treat the specimen, and then we placed it in fumigation for a month. After that, we took it out again and we just monitored it, and we didn't find any activity after that. But that's just one instance I want to mention where what we would do if we suspect pest activity. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much to Joffred and Gabriel. And now we'll hand over to Sibu from Bay World, and I think she's got Bianca with her there. So we'll hand over to you.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Greetings to everyone. My name is Sibusisiwe Ngulana and a collections manager at Bay World. I would like to thank Bianca for preparing the talk. Bianca is the research assistant in the collection section also, and we'll be talking about the dry collections in the museum today. So the dry collection comprises of marine mammals and the tortoise dry collection. I will start with marine mammals. Next slide, please. So the marine mammal collection was established by Graham Ross in the late 1960s, who started a systematic program of responding to marine mammal strandings along the coastline from Mossel Bay to KZN. So this collection is still continuing at the moment. We are still responding to strandings as the research and collection section. This collection currently has about 600 specimens and is the largest marine mammal collection in the Southern Hemisphere. It is representing 12 pinnipeds, 43 cetaceans, and 1 Sirenian species, a dugong. This collection consists of skeletal material such as skulls, postcranial skeleton, and teeth. This material is mostly collected from strandings and bycatch along the eastern and southern coast of South Africa. During the collection process, which involves dissecting the animal, most of the flesh is removed from the skull, which is the most collected part of the specimen, and these are later left in the water tanks in our maceration site that is located outside the museum for all the flesh to rot. Afterwards, this material is then brought back to Bay World, soaked in soapy hot water and disinfectant, scrubbed, dried, labeled, packed, and incorporated in the collection. Next slide, please. So with regards to storing specimens, we have 3 storage rooms and a passageway, and most of the stores have metal shelving. I would like to thank the NSCF for funding some of the metal shelves we have in the stores. And recently we have metal shelving installed in the pinniped store. One store, we still have wooden shelving installed. Bigger teeth are stored in metal cabinets. Most of the specimens are stored in different sized boxes, depending on the size of the skulls. So the specimens on lowest shelves are slightly raised off the ground, which is one of the standard requirements in the NSCF manual. The relative humidity is maintained at 55%, and this we know because the dehumidifier indicates the relative humidity in the room. We also have extractor fans and have blocked out the windows in the passageway. The doors leading to the stores are always locked unless we are working in the stores. Next slide, please. So with regards to challenges in the collection, space is one of those. So we recycle a lot of boxes, and with the reorganizing in the stores and repacking boxes, we also accumulate a lot more boxes, but we never have space to store these boxes. So we collapse them and pack them in one of the stores, as you can see in that picture there. So we've tried to collapse most of the boxes that are collapsible, and we put them in the empty shelves in the store. Some of them are stored in the intern's office. Marine mammal bones are really not commonly affected by pests. However, we do have specimens that grow mold due to high humidity. So the mostly affected skulls are usually oily skulls of these big whales, and sometimes these are not scrubbed before they come to the collection, and they are old, so they must have been buried, and then they just brushed the sand off and were labeled and put in the main collection. So to prevent this from happening, we make sure that after the bones are washed in that processing the skulls I mentioned at the beginning, we make sure that they are properly dried before they go in the stores. If we do find a specimen during our monitoring or checkups, if we do find a specimen that has mold, the specimen is then wiped with 10% bleach or 96% ethanol. So monitoring for mold growth includes having dehumidifiers running continuously in all the stores and the passageway, and just physically checking mostly open boxes for mold. So all the skulls that have open boxes are the ones that are prone to grow mold. So we monitor those and check for mold, and also on the big specimens in the passageway, we do check them regularly. We will soon have data loggers installed in the stores, which will also help monitor humidity and temperatures in the stores. Again, I would like to thank the NSCF for funding us to purchase these data loggers. Another problem was that all our larger skulls do not have cushioning, but things are about to change as the NSCF has again done the things. We are grateful for the funding we recently got to purchase polyethylene foam to put under the skulls to prevent damage to the skulls. And lastly, due to space problems, sometimes it's difficult to access larger specimens, but we do try to store larger specimens at the bottom shelf. Lifting them out of there becomes a problem again. But Greg, who is the curator, is working on a plan to have caster wheels installed on the bottom shelves to make moving of these specimens in and out of the shelves easier. And next slide, please. So remember, I said we also have a dry tortoise collection with the marine mammals. So this collection was established by John Hewitt in Albany Museum in the early 1900s. This collection was then moved to Bayweld and was incorporated in the main herpetology collection. This collection has about 700 specimens. It was previously stored with the wet herpetology collection until a few years ago when it was moved to the marine mammal passageway. The majority of the specimens are stored in individual plastic bags, packed in boxes and in metal cabinets. This collection has been prone to mold growth and pest infestation when it was stored with the wet collection. Pests were primarily beetles, and these were the reasons for moving it out of the wet collection store to the dry collection stores. However, prior to moving the collection, it was fumigated with doom foggers, cleaned, each specimen was put in individual plastic bags and in boxes, and then they were stored back in the metal cabinets in the passageway where the marine mammal collection is located. So most of the specimens were severely damaged by these beetles. However, they were all kept in the collection. So to monitor for pests in this collection, sticky traps for insects are put in cabinets and checked for the presence of pests. But I must say that since the collection moved to the dry collections a few years ago, there has not been pest infestation observed. And finally, the dry collection is fumigated biannually during the museum's routine fumigation. A spray kiln is usually used by the company who does the fumigation for us. So that's it from our side. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Sibo and Bianca, for that presentation. And we're now going to move from whales and seals and dolphins to flies and other bugs. So over to you, Bandiso.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amandisa Ndlovu, and I'm from the KZN Museum, working as an entomology research technician. Today, I'll be talking about how we look after our dry collection and the procedures we take for pest management. Next slide, please. So how we house our collection is that we have 8 collection rooms, mainly Diptera 1, Diptera 2, and non-Diptera. So as the word or the name. Okay, sorry about that. So as I was explaining, Diptera 1 and Diptera 2 just has flies, and non-Diptera has different types of insects. So our collection rooms have shelving units that are mounted on the side of the walls, as the picture on the bottom right shows. Specimens are pinned on stainless steel pins, given labels, and are placed in unit trays that are lined with foam. So the unit trays are placed in the wooden drawers, as the picture below shows. We have over 200,000 insects in total. Next slide, please. So how we take care of our collection is that we spot check the drawers daily. So what I do is that I take out 5 or more drawers and inspect them individually to see if there are any pests or dust in them. I then clean the top of the glass lids with windoline and tissue paper. We also take care of our collection by keeping it clean, free from litter and any dust. Next slide, please. So the types of problematic vertebrates that we are likely to find or expect are silverfish, booglice, spiders, cockroaches, and beetles. Another problem that we are likely to find in our collection rooms is mold. Next slide, please. So how we monitor the pests is that we use blunted traps, which are placed against the walls, preferably in the corners where they are most likely to catch wandering insects. We check the traps once a week, and we record it in the pest trap sheets that is in the below picture. The traps are replaced when they become dirty or if they have caught large numbers of insects, to avoid the insects from becoming food for the pests. We also have pheromones. Pheromones are used in the traps to lure insects and are incorporated into the sticky glue on a board. The same principle applies as of the blunted traps, as I have explained above. So we also do physical inspections where the drawers are taken out, as I had explained previously, where we physically check if there are any pests in the drawer or mold that is building up on the specimens. Next slide, please. So how to prevent traps. So the influence of temperature and moisture plays a huge role in the prevention of infestation, as insects need warmth and humidity to thrive. The main environmental objectives to prevent pests in our collection rooms are keeping the humidity low. So we have installed dehumidifiers. We keep the collection room dark by switching off the lights if they are not needed. We also keep the collection room, of which we prohibit eating, drinking, and littering in the collection room. We also have data loggers to monitor the temperature and humidity in the collection rooms. Next slide, please. So how we treat our pests, we treat them by freezing. If pests are found in the drawers, we immediately isolate the drawer. We then wrap the drawer with a plastic bag and label the drawer, which indicates the date. We then put the drawer in the freezer. Our freezer is about negative 18 to 200 degrees Celsius for a period of 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks, we take out the drawer from the freezer and place it in the counter. We have a counter that's right opposite our freezer, so we put the drawers there. And then we wait for it for about a few hours or a day to allow for condensation. Then we unwrap the plastic bag. We then check if the pests are still remaining on the drawer. If not, we then put the drawers back in the collection rooms. For fumigation, we use doom foggers. So what we do is that we take our can of the doom fogger, we open it and we place it in the middle of each collection room. We usually do this at the end of the day on a Friday or last day of work if it's in the holidays. So this is to make sure that there is no one in the building, as the doom foggers tend to have strong chemicals that can negatively affect people. The can is left there over the weekend or a few days, and then is removed from the collection room and we throw them away in the bin. Fumigation is usually done once a year. That's like the annual fumigation for the whole institution. And we fumigate more than once a year if it is necessary. So we also have physical removal of the collection of the pests. Collection rooms are cleaned frequently. And if we see any visible or mobile pests, then we remove them by hand or using forceps. And if mold is found, we remove it using a small paintbrush that is dipped in alcohol to clean the mold of the specimen. And then the drawer is frozen, like I explained, using the freezing process. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mandisa. And then our last presenter for this morning is Nikisha from Sandbox. I'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikisha Singh. I am the curator for the Skukuza Biological Reference Collection. Collections were started during the 1950s, but the museum and herbarium actually materialized in 1959 when the building began by Dr. U.D.V. PNR. We have a variety of collections and taxonomic groups. Our wet collection consists of reptiles, amphibians, mammals, fish, and arthropods. We have an insect collection, a herbarium collection, and bird and mammal skins as well. All in all, we have around 14 thousand zoological specimens and 16,000 herbarium specimens. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. With regard to the dry collections, being our mammal and bird skins and the insect and herbarium specimens, we fumigate twice in the year. Since I have started, I have adopted the previous fumigation methods as we carry the fumigation out ourselves and not with the help of a service provider. We use a combination of fumitabs and doom fogger. Prior to the fumigation, usually a week in advance, an email is usually sent to the communications department and an email notice is sent to all colleagues that fumigation will be taking place. More so, we do this because fumitabs do emit a lot of smoke, and just to warn everyone that it's not a fire taking place, but it's just general fumigation. We do fumigation from 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I usually come in on the same evening to check that everything is still all right. During the weekend, the air cons are switched on so that any fumes or hazardous fumes can circulate out. Doors are also opened, and all fumigation is recorded as well. Next slide, please. Okay, these are just pictures of our museum and our herbarium. We ensure that all herbarium cabinets, all drawers are opened so that the smoke is able to penetrate and eradicate any pests that might occur. Next slide, please. Okay, pest control for our bird and mammal skins and herbarium skins. Our bird and mammal skins are sealed in industrial plastic. This does act as a barrier against pests. We are currently still using Vapona, and this is changed once every 3 months. I am looking at alternative methods as Vapona is quite hazardous to health. Okay. Our drawers are checked regularly for pests. Previously, I was doing this once every 6 months, but I found this was not adequate. So now we do this once every 3 months. The herbarium cabinets are checked at random once every 6 months. All data and information pertaining to the checks and so on are recorded as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Our insect collections, we also use Vapona, and this is changed every 3 months. Drawers are checked regularly for pests. Previously, it was once every 6 months as well, but recently what I found is we've had signs of dermatid larvae in some of the insect drawers, so I've changed our protocols now to at least check these once every month towards the end of the month. So we usually set 2 or 3 days aside and go through the insect collections drawer by drawer, checking for any damage, for any signs. So if there are signs of pests found, the entire drawer is placed in a plastic bag and put into the freezer at a minus 120 degrees Celsius. Then it is taken out and left to thaw at room temperature for another 5 days. As I think Sifiso had mentioned with regard to the herbarium specimens, it's a similar case where we allow for any eggs to hatch and that sort of thing. And the drawer will be put back into the freezer, so any larvae or eggs that might have hatched in between that time will be eradicated. We record all the information such as the type of pest, signs, any other information that might be valuable. Pictures are also taken of any damage or any signs of pest for record. We do have a lot of old and frail specimens in our collection, some dating back to the 1960s and 1970s. I am trying to put a plan in place to try and mend some of these specimens. Next slide, please. Okay. Just general upkeep and useful tips. We have 2 collection storerooms. On the right-hand corner is the second storeroom, and we've had a problem with clutter and old archival material. So recently I did find spider beetles accumulating because of the clutter. So we made it a priority to get that cleaned and move all the boxes, move any unnecessary material from the collection rooms. Yeah. Time is always not on our side, but I think it is quite important to make time to make sure that clutter is being cleared away, collection rooms, collection areas are being kept neat and tidy. And it's also important to review management plans and alter them accordingly. How often collections might actually need to be checked for pests as opposed to how often they're actually being carried out. A second barrier we're trying to put in place for pest control is also the use of UV insect traps, and to place these in strategic places within the herbarium, collection rooms, and museum to act as a second barrier. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to Nikisha and to all the other presenters. We really do appreciate your time and effort to share your experience and your knowledge with us. I think it's been really very interesting hearing about all these different kinds of collections, but also just the range of different approaches to pest management in them, and some of the challenges with storage and some of the recommendations about storage. So we're not going to go into groups or anything, but here are some questions. We've heard all of these different presenters, all this information. But just take a minute to just think about what stood out for you, what was a key learning or something that you'd never realized before, or just something that amazed you. And then think about, is there anything you'd like to know more about? So something where you think you'd need to go more deep into it to really understand it. And is there anything that left you feeling puzzled? So it's a question that's there. You can just take a minute maybe and think about it, and then you can put it into the chat box, put your comments. Doesn't have to be on all of them. You can just pick one thing, and let's get some chat going in the chat box there, and then we'll go through them. If anybody wants to put up their hand and ask any questions, you can do that as well. So if you've got questions for the presenters, you can put up your hand and ask. Otherwise, just put it into the chat. So at this point, there should be lots of questions and comments coming through, and we'll keep an eye on them. So let's get a view of everybody. So what we'll do from this point as well is that we'll stop the recording. So sometimes people are a little bit nervous to say something and then have it recorded and put on the internet. And so we'll stop the recording at that point. And so it's a closed discussion.